Fannie Grant was standing in the middle of a glittering charity gala when her phone vibrated inside her silver clutch. Across the ballroom, her husband Silas was laughing beside his mother like they belonged on the cover of a luxury magazine. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above them, champagne glasses clinked. Everyone looked perfect. Then the voice on the phone whispered, "Mrs. Grant. I'm calling from St. Mary's Hospital. There was a mistake made in 1994. Fannie frowned. A mistake. The woman hesitated before saying the sentence that split her life in half. Your mother already knew. Suddenly the room felt too small to breathe in, and for the first time in 30 years, Fannie realized everyone around her might have been loving a version of her that never truly existed. If you found out your entire life was built on a lie, would you want the truth even if it destroyed everything? Let me know in the comments before we continue. The drive to her mother's house felt longer than it should have. Fannie barely remembered leaving the gala. 1 second she had been standing beneath chandeliers, worth more than most people's homes, smiling politely beside donors and surgeons and politicians, while Vivian Grant paraded her around like a polished accessory. The next she was gripping the steering wheel so tightly her fingers hurt. There was a mistake in 1994. Your mother already knew. The words kept replaying inside her head like a cracked record. Outside the windshield, the Connecticut streets blurred under freezing rain. Christmas lights glowed softly on manicured lawns, beautiful and distant like someone else's life. Maybe it already was. Fannie pulled into the driveway of the small colonial house where she'd grown up. Unlike the Grant estate, it looked warm, real. The porch light was still on, just like it had been every night since she was a child. Her mother was waiting behind the front door before she even knocked. Eleanor Hayes looked pale. Not confused, not surprised, terrified. That scared Fannie more than the phone call itself. "You knew I was coming," Fannie whispered. Eleanor swallowed hard. "Fannie, no?" Her voice cracked instantly. "Don't say my name like everything's normal." For a moment, neither woman moved. Fannie suddenly felt 6 years old again, standing in this same hallway after scraping her knees, waiting for her mother to tell her things would be okay. But tonight, Eleanor looked like the one who needed saving. "Let me come in," Fannie said quietly. Eleanor stepped aside. The house smelled like cinnamon tea and old books. Familiar. Safe. Fannie hated that it still comforted her. She dropped her clutch onto the kitchen counter with shaking hands. "Start talking." Eleanor stared at her for several seconds before sitting slowly at the table. Her hands trembled around the mug she held. That's when Fannie realized something horrifying. Her mother had rehearsed this moment before, maybe for years. "The hospital called me too," Eleanor admitted softly. Fannie laughed once. It wasn't humor. It sounded broken. "And then I told them not to contact you." Silence crashed between them. Fannie blinked slowly. "You what I was trying to protect you." "No!" Fannie stepped backward. "No, don't do that. Don't turn this into some noble thing." Eleanor's eyes filled immediately, but Fannie was too overwhelmed to feel guilty. What mistake, she demanded. What are they talking about? Eleanor looked down at the table, and that was all the answer Fannie needed. Cold spread through her chest. Oh my God. Tears blurred her vision instantly. Oh my God. Fannie, I'm not your daughter. The sentence shattered the room. Eleanor inhaled sharply like she'd been slapped. But she still didn't deny it. Fannie pressed a trembling hand against her mouth. 30 years. 30 years of birthdays, Christmas mornings, school pickups, bedtime stories. Every memory suddenly felt unstable beneath her feet. "I gave birth to a baby girl on October 17th, 1994, Eleanor whispered. 3 days later, the hospital realized there had been a mix-up in the maternity ward. Fannie stared at her in horror. They switched us. Eleanor nodded once. The room tilted. Fannie grabbed the counter to steady herself. No, she whispered. No, no, no. She thought about her face, her smile, her eyes. All the times Vivian Grant had looked at her strangely during family dinners, all the subtle comments. You don't look like your mother. Such unusual features. There's something different about you. Fannie had laughed them off. Now they came back like knives. What happened to the other baby? She asked weakly. Eleanor closed her eyes. She went home with your biological parents. The words made Fannie physically nauseous. So where is she now? Eleanor hesitated, and somehow that hesitation hurt more than the confession itself. Her name is Savannah Cole. Eleanor finally said. She lives in Chicago. Savannah. A stranger had been living Fannie's life, or maybe Fannie had been living hers. Does she know? Fannie asked. No. Who else knows? Another silence. Too long. Fannie's heartbeat quickened. Mom. Eleanor looked away. Silas knows. The air vanished from the room. Fannie felt her stomach drop so violently she almost lost balance. What he found out last year. Rage exploded through her chest so suddenly it frightened her. He knew, she snapped. My husband knew my entire identity was a lie and never told me. Eleanor started crying. He promised he wouldn't hurt you. Hurt me! Fannie laughed bitterly. You think this isn't hurting me? She turned away violently, pacing across the kitchen. Her designer heels clicked sharply against the hardwood floor. Every memory with Silas suddenly felt poisoned. Their marriage, their vows, the way he sometimes looked at her lately, cold, distant, calculating. Had he already started seeing her differently, less legitimate, less worthy, like damaged property? Fannie suddenly remembered something Vivian had said 2 months earlier at dinner. Well, legacy matters. Blood always tells eventually. At the time, Silas had gone completely silent. Now she knew why. Oh my God, she whispered. Eleanor stood carefully. Fannie, please listen to me. No. Tears streamed down Fannie's face now. You let me build my entire life on a lie. I loved you. You lied to me. I was afraid they'd take you away from me. Fannie froze. For the first time that night, Eleanor's voice cracked open completely. Raw. Human. Terrified. I saw you for the first time and I loved you instantly, Eleanor sobbed. I didn't care whose blood you carried. You were mine. The pain in her mother's voice was real. That was the cruelest part. Fannie could see the truth. Eleanor had loved her, but love built on fear still became a prison eventually. You should have told me, Fannie whispered. Eleanor looked shattered. I know. The clock ticked softly in the kitchen. Outside rain hit the windows in slow waves. Finally, Fannie wiped her tears with trembling fingers. Tell me everything, she said quietly. Eleanor hesitated, and that hesitation changed everything again, because suddenly Fannie understood there was more, much more. Then Eleanor whispered the sentence that made her blood run cold. The hospital records were altered. Fannie stared at her. What does that mean? Eleanor looked absolutely sick. It means, she whispered, the switch may not have been an accident. Fannie didn't sleep. She stayed in her childhood bedroom until sunrise, sitting on the edge of the bed while 30 years of memories unraveled inside her mind. The pale blue walls still held framed photographs from her teenage years, dance recitals, graduation pictures, her wedding portrait with Silas. Every image felt haunted now. Who was she in those photos? Fannie Grant, or some stranger accidentally dropped into another woman's life? Downstairs, Eleanor moved quietly through the kitchen before dawn, probably hoping coffee and routine could soften what had happened. It couldn't. Nothing could. At 7 in the morning, Fannie walked downstairs wearing yesterday's black evening dress under her wool coat. Her mascara was smudged beneath exhausted eyes. Eleanor looked up immediately. "You should rest." Fannie ignored her. "I want every file you have." Eleanor stiffened. "Fannie, every file," she repeated coldly. "No more half-truths." For a moment, Eleanor looked like she might refuse. Then she slowly stood and walked toward the hallway closet. She reached onto the top shelf and pulled down an old storage box. Dust coated the edges. That meant it had been hidden for years. Fannie's chest tightened painfully. Eleanor carried the box to the kitchen table like it weighed 100 pounds. Inside were documents, hospital forms, insurance records, letters, and one sealed envelope. Fannie sat down carefully. Her hands shook as she picked up the first file. St. Mary's Hospital, October 1994. She flipped through pages rapidly until she froze. 2 birth records. Baby girl Hayes. Baby girl Cole. Savannah Cole, Fannie whispered. The name no longer sounded abstract. It sounded personal. Painfully personal. "She was born 3 hours after you," Eleanor said quietly. "The nurses mixed up the bassinets during a shift change." Fannie kept reading. But something felt wrong. Lines had been crossed out, dates corrected, signatures overwritten. "You were right," she murmured. "These records were altered." Eleanor looked pale. "I told you." Fannie stared at one page specifically. There was a handwritten note in the margin, "Priority Family Review." "What does that mean?" Eleanor hesitated again. Fannie slammed the folder shut. "Stop doing that." "Doing what?" "Hesitating like you're still deciding how much truth I can handle." Tears filled Eleanor's eyes instantly. But Fannie couldn't comfort her anymore. Not tonight. Maybe not ever again. Finally, Eleanor whispered the Coles weren't wealthy. Fannie frowned. And in St. Mary's was struggling financially back then. They were desperate for donors. A cold feeling spread slowly through Fannie's body. No. Eleanor looked down. The Grants were already major donors to the hospital. The room went silent. Fannie stared at her mother in disbelief. "You think Silas's family was involved?" "Involved, I don't know," Eleanor said quickly. "I never had proof, but you suspected it." Eleanor nodded weakly. Fannie stood abruptly and walked toward the window. Outside, snow had begun falling softly across the neighborhood. Everything looked peaceful. Meanwhile, her entire identity was collapsing. She suddenly remembered the first time Vivian Grant met her. Vivian had smiled politely over champagne and diamonds. Then she'd said, "You're lovely," not what I expected for Silas. At the time, Fannie thought she meant her middle-class upbringing. Now she wondered if Vivian had already known. The thought made her stomach twist violently. "Did Silas tell his mother?" Fannie asked. "I don't know, but you think he did." Eleanor didn't answer. That was answer enough. Fannie laughed bitterly under her breath. Of course he told her. The Grant family treated secrets like currency, useful only when weaponized. "What about Savannah?" Fannie asked after a moment. "What's her life like?" Eleanor's expression softened with guilt. "She grew up in Chicago." "Was she loved?" "Yes." The answer surprised Fannie. "She lost both her parents in a car accident 5 years ago." Fannie closed her eyes briefly. Another wave of grief crashed through her chest. Somewhere out there was a woman who should have grown up in Eleanor's safe little house, who should have had birthday cakes and piano lessons and stability. Instead, she got grief. And Fannie got the Grant family. A beautiful cage. Does Savannah know any of this? No. Why not? Because I couldn't destroy 2 lives instead of 1. Fannie turned sharply. "You already did." Eleanor flinched. Immediately guilt stabbed through Fannie. That was the problem. Even now, even shattered, she still worried about hurting other people. Maybe that was why Silas had become so comfortable dismissing her feelings. because Fannie always made room for everyone else's pain before her own. Her phone buzzed suddenly on the counter. Silas. Fannie stared at the screen. Once seeing his name had made her feel safe. Now it filled her with suspicion. She answered without warmth. "What, where are you?" No concern, no softness, just irritation. Fannie almost laughed. "At my mother's. You left the gala without saying anything. Maybe because I found out my entire life is a lie." Silence. Too much silence. "You shouldn't be discussing this over the phone," Silas finally said carefully. Fannie's chest tightened instantly. Not shock, not comfort, damage control. That's what he cared about. "You knew," she whispered. Another silence. Then Fannie, "You knew. I was trying to protect you," the exact same words Eleanor used. Suddenly, they sounded disgusting. "Interesting," Fannie said coldly. "Everyone keeps protecting me by lying to my face. You're emotional right now." There it was, that calm, polished tone he used whenever he wanted her to feel irrational, small, embarrassing. Fannie used to apologize when he spoke like that. Tonight, something inside her hardened instead. "How long?" she asked quietly. "A year. A year. 365 days. A full year of dinners and vacations and sleeping beside her while he carried this secret like a loaded weapon." "You looked me in the eye every day," she whispered. "I didn't want to hurt you." "No," Fannie said slowly. "You didn't want to inconvenience yourself." Silas exhaled sharply. "You're being unfair." Unfair. The word almost made her laugh. Her identity had just exploded, and somehow she was still the difficult one. "You know what's interesting?" Fannie said softly. "I can't tell which betrayal hurts more right now." "Fannie, my mother lied because she was afraid of losing me." Silence. "But I think you lied because you stopped valuing me." His voice turned colder. "That's not true." Then why does it feel true neither of them spoke? And for the first time in their marriage, Fannie realized silence could be an answer too. Finally, Silas said quietly, "Come home." Not because he loved her, because he wanted control back. Fannie saw it clearly now. Every invisible crack in their marriage suddenly glowed under the light. "I don't know where home is anymore," she whispered. Then she hung up. The kitchen fell silent again. Eleanor looked terrified. "What are you going to do?" Fannie stared down at the altered hospital records spread across the table, then at the name Savannah Cole, then at her wedding ring. Something painful shifted inside her. Not healing, not yet, but the beginning of awakening. And for the first time in years, Fannie stopped asking herself how to save her marriage. Instead, she asked the question that would change everything. Who benefits from me staying broken? By the time Fannie returned to the Grant estate the next evening, snow covered the long circular driveway in perfect white layers. Everything looked untouched, elegant, controlled. Exactly how Vivian Grant liked it. The mansion glowed beneath golden exterior lights while luxury cars lined the entrance for the weekly family dinner. Staff members moved quietly through the foyer carrying silver trays and crystal glasses. The Grant family loved rituals, appearances, power, and tonight Fannie suddenly felt like an outsider walking into enemy territory. A valet opened her car door. "Good evening, Mrs. Grant." Fannie almost flinched at the name. Mrs. Grant. Who even was that now? Inside the house, laughter echoed from the dining room. Silas stood near the fireplace in a charcoal suit drink in hand, looking devastatingly handsome in the effortless way rich men always seemed to. For years, Fannie had mistaken beauty for safety. Now she saw something colder underneath it. Calculation. The moment Silas noticed her, his jaw tightened slightly. Not relief, not concern, annoyance. "You finally came home," he said quietly as she approached. Home. Again with that word. Fannie removed her gloves slowly. Interesting choice of language. Silas lowered his voice immediately. Not here. Of course not here. Never where the Grant family image could crack. Fannie looked around the room. Vivian sat elegantly near the head of the dining table in emerald silk diamonds sparkling beneath soft lighting. Beside her were Silas's older brother Damien and his wife Celeste, both polished and emotionally vacant in the way wealthy families often perfected. Everyone looked up when Fannie entered. The room shifted subtly, like people sensing blood in water. Vivian smiled first. It wasn't warmth. It was performance. "There she is," Vivian said smoothly. "We were beginning to worry." "No, you weren't," Fannie thought. But she smiled politely anyway. Years of survival had trained her well. Dinner began with expensive wine and conversations about investments, political donors, and luxury development projects in Manhattan. Fannie barely touched her food. Every sound felt sharper tonight. The clink of silverware, the fake laughter, the way Silas never once reached for her hand. Then Vivian set down her wineglass delicately. "So she said casually, 'I heard St. Mary's finally contacted you.'" Silence dropped instantly across the table. Fannie slowly looked up. There it was. The real dinner had finally begun. "You knew too?" Fannie asked. Vivian dabbed the corner of her mouth with a napkin. "The situation has been known privately for some time." Fannie's pulse spiked. Privately, she repeated, "That's an interesting word." Silas shifted beside her. "Mother." But Vivian ignored him. "You must understand," she continued calmly, "families like ours value discretion." "Families like ours." The phrase sliced through Fannie, because suddenly she heard the hidden meaning beneath it. "Families like ours. And you are not truly one of us." Damien cleared his throat awkwardly, but Celeste watched silently with open curiosity. Fannie looked directly at Vivian. "How long have you known?" Vivian took another sip of wine before answering. "Long enough." Fannie almost laughed. The cruelty of wealthy people was always so polished. Never loud, never messy. Just elegant little cuts until someone bled quietly. "And no one thought I deserved the truth?" Fannie asked. Vivian tilted her head slightly. What exactly would the truth have changed everything Fannie thought? Everything. But before she could answer, Vivian continued. "You still had an excellent education, a beautiful life, a successful husband." Fannie stared at her in disbelief, as if identity could be replaced by luxury, as if love and truth were negotiable once enough money entered the room. Silas finally spoke. "This conversation isn't productive." "No," Fannie said softly. "It's finally honest." The room froze. Vivian studied her carefully now. For the first time, Fannie realized her mother-in-law looked almost irritated by her composure. Usually Fannie softened conflict, smoothed tension, apologized first. Tonight she didn't. Vivian folded her hands elegantly. "You seem emotional." The classic Grant family weapon. If a woman reacted to betrayal, she became irrational. If a man caused betrayal, he became stressed. Fannie suddenly saw the pattern everywhere. Years of manipulation disguised as sophistication. "You know what's interesting?" Fannie said quietly. "I spent years trying to earn respect in this family." Vivian's expression hardened slightly, and now Fannie held her gaze. "Now I realize you already decided who I was before I ever walked through that door." For a brief moment nobody spoke. Then Vivian smiled faintly, a dangerous smile. "Well," she said, "blood tends to reveal itself eventually." The sentence landed like a slap. Silas inhaled sharply beside her. Even Damien looked uncomfortable, but Vivian remained perfectly calm. Fannie felt humiliation burn through her chest, not because she believed Vivian, because she finally understood. Vivian had never truly accepted her, not for 1 second. All those years of subtle criticism suddenly rearranged themselves into clarity. The comments about breeding, legacy, elegance, class. Vivian hadn't just been judging Fannie's manners. She'd been questioning her worth as a human being, and somehow that hurt even more than the hospital secret itself. Fannie pushed back her chair slowly. "I need some air." Silas stood immediately. "I'll come with you." "No," she said coldly. She walked out toward the terrace alone. The winter air hit her skin sharply. Snowflakes drifted across the dark backyard, while music from inside echoed faintly through the glass doors. Fannie gripped the stone railing tightly. Her chest hurt. Everything hurt. 30 years of trying to be enough. Pretty enough. Elegant enough. Patient enough. Good enough. And none of it mattered because people determined her value long before she even knew the game existed. The terrace door slid open behind her. Silas stepped outside anyway. "You embarrassed yourself in there," he said quietly. Fannie turned slowly. "Excuse me. You're letting emotions control you." She stared at him in disbelief. "My life exploded 2 days ago, and spiraling publicly won't help. Publicly, always publicly, image first, humanity second." Fannie laughed bitterly. "Do you even hear yourself anymore?" Silas rubbed his jaw impatiently. "I was trying to protect you." "No," she snapped. "You were protecting convenience. That's not fair." "There's that word again." Silas's expression darkened slightly. "What did you want me to do? Destroy your relationship with your mother? At least give me the choice." Her voice cracked through the cold air. Finally. Real emotion. Not polished, not controlled. Silas stared at her for several seconds before speaking again. "You're overreacting because you're overwhelmed." Something inside Fannie went completely still. Overreacting. That word, that tone. Suddenly memories flooded back all at once. Every time she cried after being humiliated by Vivian. Every time Silas told her she was too sensitive. Every argument that somehow became her fault for feeling hurt. Her entire marriage suddenly looked different. Not partnership, management. She looked at her husband carefully. Really looked at him, and for the first time she realized something terrifying. Silas Grant did not love vulnerable people. He loved controllable ones. Before she could respond, voices echoed faintly from inside. Vivian laughing, then a woman's voice. Soft, familiar. Fannie frowned slightly. Moments later, a tall blonde woman entered the dining room carrying a designer coat over her arm. Vanessa Whitmore. Fannie's stomach tightened instantly. Vivian stood to greet her warmly. Too warmly. And when Vanessa kissed Silas on the cheek through the open doorway, Fannie saw it. Not surprise, not distance. Recognition, comfort, intimacy. The world tilted beneath her feet again. Then Vivian glanced toward Fannie outside on the terrace and smiled, like she'd been waiting for this moment. Fannie didn't confront Silas that night. That was the part that scared her most. Not the betrayal, not Vanessa Whitmore's hand lingering too comfortably on her husband's arm, not even Vivian's satisfied smile through the glass doors. It was the silence growing inside her, cold, sharp, controlled. For years, Fannie had believed heartbreak looked dramatic. Crying on bathroom floors, screaming matches, thrown glasses, and slammed doors. But real heartbreak was quieter. It was sitting beside your husband on the drive home while snow fell softly across the windshield, and realizing you no longer recognized the man beside you. Silas drove with one hand on the steering wheel, calm, composed, like nothing had happened. Vanessa's perfume still lingered faintly on his coat. Fannie stared out the passenger window. "You're being childish," Silas finally said. She almost smiled. Of course. The Grant family always turned pain into inconvenience. "I didn't say anything tonight," Fannie replied quietly. "That's exactly the problem." She looked at him slowly. "Explain that. You made everyone uncomfortable." Fannie let out one soft laugh. Not amused, just amazed. "My entire identity collapsed 3 days ago, and spiraling emotionally won't fix it." There it was again. Emotionally, as if feelings themselves were embarrassing. Silas tightened his grip slightly on the wheel. "Vanessa is a consultant working with the firm." Fannie turned towards him fully now. "I didn't ask." Silence. Then, "You're implying something inappropriate." Fannie stared at him for several seconds, and suddenly she remembered the beginning of their marriage. Silas bringing her coffee while she painted in their tiny first apartment. Silas kissing her forehead before long workdays. Silas telling her she made him feel human. Back then he used to look at her like she mattered. Now he looked at her like she was becoming inconvenient paperwork. "You know what hurts the most?" Fannie asked softly. Silas exhaled impatiently. "Fannie, no. Answer me honestly for once." The car stopped at a red light. Snow drifted slowly under the street lamps. Fannie swallowed hard. "I can survive being lied to," she whispered. "But I don't know when you stopped respecting me." Something flickered across Silas's face. Briefly. Guilt, maybe. Or irritation that she'd finally noticed. The light turned green. He drove again. "You're exhausted," he said. "We'll talk tomorrow." Translation: "You're emotional now, easier to control later." Fannie looked away again, and for the first time in years, she stopped trying to save the conversation. When they arrived home, she went upstairs without another word. Their penthouse bedroom overlooked the Manhattan skyline, all glittering lights and expensive silence. It suddenly felt like a hotel room. Beautiful, cold, temporary. Fannie stood in front of the mirror, slowly removing her earrings. "Who are you?" The question haunted her now, not just because of the hospital, because somewhere along the way she'd disappeared inside this marriage too. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. For a moment she considered ignoring it. Then she answered quietly. "Hello," a woman's voice replied. Soft. Careful. "Is this Fannie Grant? Yes?" There was hesitation. Then, "My name is Savannah Cole." Fannie stopped breathing. For several seconds neither woman spoke. 30 years of separation sitting silently between them. Savannah finally laughed nervously. "I guess this is weird." Weird? The understatement almost shattered Fannie completely. "You know," Fannie whispered, "the hospital contacted me yesterday." Fannie sat slowly on the edge of the bed. "What did they tell you, that we might have been switched at birth?" "Might have?" As if there was still a gentle version of this nightmare. Fannie closed her eyes. Savannah's voice sounded warm. Real. Not polished like the Grant family. Not careful like Eleanor. Just human. "I almost didn't call," Savannah admitted. "I figured you probably hated me." Fannie's eyes opened instantly. "What I mean?" Savannah laughed awkwardly. "You got the better life." The sentence punched straight through Fannie's chest. No bitterness, no jealousy, just quiet acceptance. And somehow that hurt even more. "You don't know my life," Fannie whispered before she could stop herself. Silence. Then Savannah said softly, "Fair enough." Fannie pressed trembling fingers against her forehead. "What was your family like?" The question escaped before she could think. Savannah paused. Messy, she admitted. Loud. Broke half the time. Fannie smiled faintly despite herself. Savannah continued, but good people. Pain tightened in Fannie's throat. Good people. Meanwhile, the Grant family had millions and still treated affection like a negotiation. My dad fixed motorcycles, Savannah said quietly. My mom worked double shifts at a clinic. Fannie imagined it suddenly. A tiny apartment, noise, laughter, bills stacked on counters. Love without conditions. A life she'd never known. They died 5 years ago, Savannah added carefully. Fannie's chest ached instantly. I'm sorry. Yeah, another silence. But this one felt different. Not hostile, not manipulative. Just two women standing in the wreckage of something neither of them caused. Finally, Savannah spoke again. There's something else you should know. Fannie straightened slightly. What I think your husband's cheating on you. The words landed without surprise. Maybe because part of her already knew. Still hearing it aloud burned. What makes you say that I saw him? Fannie's stomach tightened. Where's Chicago? About 2 months ago. The room tilted slightly. Savannah continued carefully. I didn't know who he was back then, but after the hospital contacted me, they showed me photos. Fannie's voice barely worked. Who was he with a blonde woman? Vanessa, of course. Savannah hesitated. They looked close. Close. Such a gentle word for betrayal. Fannie laughed once under her breath. I sound insane, Savannah said quickly. Maybe I shouldn't have called. No, Fannie whispered immediately. I'm glad you did. And she meant it. Because for the first time since this nightmare began, someone spoke to her without manipulation hidden beneath their words. No gaslighting, no image management. Just honesty. Savannah exhaled softly. I have something else too. Fannie frowned slightly. What a photo. Her heartbeat slowed. A photo of what your husband Savannah said carefully, holding her outside a hotel. The blood drained from Fannie's face. I can send it if you want. For several seconds, Fannie couldn't answer. Somewhere downstairs, she heard Silas moving through the penthouse. Comfortable, secure. Probably assuming she'd cry forgive him and continue playing the role he built for her. The loyal wife, the elegant shadow beside him. But something was changing now. Something dangerous. Fannie looked at her reflection in the dark bedroom window. Then she whispered quietly, yes. A moment later, her phone vibrated. The image loaded slowly. Silas. Vanessa. His hand pressed against the small of her back, intimately outside a luxury hotel in Chicago. Not business, not friendship, betrayal, real, documented. Fannie stared at the screen for a very long time. Then unexpectedly, she stopped crying, because heartbreak was slowly turning into clarity, and clarity was far more dangerous. The next morning, Fannie woke before sunrise. For years, she had been the kind of woman who cried quietly into pillows so nobody else felt uncomfortable. Not anymore. She stood in the marble kitchen wearing silk pajamas while Manhattan glowed outside the penthouse windows. The city looked cold and endless beneath the gray winter sky. Silas walked in 20 minutes later, already dressed for work, perfect tie, perfect hair, perfect mask. He stopped when he saw her sitting silently at the kitchen island. You're up early. Fannie looked at him calmly over the rim of her coffee cup. You cheated on me in Chicago. No emotion, no shaking voice, just truth. Silas froze for half a second. Then his lawyer instincts returned immediately. Who told you that? Interesting, Fannie thought. Not denial, not outrage, just damage assessment. A woman named Savannah Cole. His jaw tightened slightly, so he knew exactly who Savannah was too. Of course he did. How much contact have you had with her? he asked carefully. Fannie almost laughed. You're worried about the wrong thing. Silas sighed impatiently. Fannie, this is complicated. No, she said quietly. It's actually very simple. She pulled out her phone and placed it on the counter between them. The photo loaded instantly. Silas and Vanessa outside the Chicago hotel, his hand against Vanessa's back. Intimate, possessive, guilty. For the first time in days, Silas looked genuinely cornered, but only briefly. Then came the calm expression again. I can explain. That sentence destroyed something inside Fannie permanently. Because men only said, I can explain, when the truth already looked terrible. Go ahead, she whispered. Silas loosened his tie slightly. Vanessa and I became close during the merger project. Close. Everyone loved soft words for ugly behavior. Fannie stared at him silently. Silas continued. You were emotionally unavailable for a long time. There it was. Blame redistribution. Fannie almost admired how naturally it came to him. My entire identity collapsed 3 days ago, she said softly. This started before that. The words hit harder than she expected, because suddenly the timeline changed. This wasn't a mistake born from recent chaos. Silas had betrayed her while she was still trying to save their marriage. How long, she asked. Silas looked away briefly. 8 months. Fannie felt physically numb. 8 months. 8 months of lies. 8 months of dinners and vacations and pretending. 8 months of sleeping beside her while touching someone else. The humiliation burned deeper than the heartbreak. What was the plan, she asked quietly. Silas frowned. What do you mean you don't do anything accidentally? Silence. That silence terrified her more than confession would have. Fannie slowly stood up from the chair. Oh my God. Fannie, you were going to leave me. It's not that simple. Yes, it is. She stepped backward like she suddenly couldn't stand near him anymore. You already decided I was temporary. Silas rubbed his jaw again, irritated now that the conversation wasn't staying under control. We were growing apart. No, Fannie snapped suddenly. I was loyal while you searched for an upgrade. The words echoed sharply through the kitchen. For the first time, Silas looked angry. Don't make this theatrical. The cruelty of that sentence stunned her. Theatrical. As if betrayal only became real when women reacted visibly enough. Fannie laughed bitterly. You know what's fascinating, she whispered. I spent years thinking you were emotionally disciplined. Silas stared at her coldly. But you're not disciplined, she continued. You're detached. That hit him. She saw it instantly, a flicker behind the eyes. Good. Let him feel something for once. Silas picked up the phone from the counter and locked the screen. You're spiraling. No, Fannie said calmly. I'm finally paying attention. The room fell silent. Then Silas made the mistake that changed everything. You wouldn't survive this divorce the way you think you would. Fannie blinked slowly. What? His expression hardened. You've been financially dependent on me for years. There it was. The real Silas, not the charming husband from charity galas, not the polished attorney smiling for cameras. This version. Cold. Arrogant. Certain she was weaker than him. Fannie felt something shift violently inside her chest. Not heartbreak. Anger. Finally. Pure anger. I gave up my career for this marriage, she said quietly. And you benefited from that arrangement too. Arrangement. God. He spoke about love like contract law. Fannie suddenly remembered all the art galleries she'd turned down after marrying him. The studio in Brooklyn she never opened. The opportunities she postponed because Silas's career needed flexibility. At the time, sacrifice felt romantic. Now it looked strategic. A woman with no income was easier to trap. Silas walked toward her slowly. "We can handle this privately if you stop reacting emotionally." Fannie stared at him in disbelief. Then something almost frightening happened. She smiled. Small. Cold. Silas frowned immediately. "What, you still think I'm scared of losing you?" For the first time that morning, uncertainty crossed his face. Because Fannie's voice sounded different now. Steadier. Silas reached for her arm gently. "Fannie." She stepped away instantly. His hand dropped. And somehow that tiny rejection shook him more than yelling would have. "You know what hurts the most?" she asked softly. Silas said nothing. "I would have stayed through almost anything if you'd just respected me enough to tell the truth." The silence after that felt enormous. Then Fannie walked toward the hallway. "Where are you going?" Silas asked. She paused near the staircase. "To figure out who benefits from me believing I'm powerless." His expression darkened immediately. "Don't start something reckless." That sentence confirmed everything. He was afraid, not of losing her emotionally, of losing control. Fannie walked upstairs without another word. Inside the bedroom, she locked the door for the first time in their marriage. Then she sat on the floor beside the bed and finally allowed herself to breathe. Her phone buzzed again. "Savannah." Fannie answered quietly. "Hey." Savannah hesitated. "Bad timing." Fannie looked toward the locked bedroom door, then toward her wedding portrait hanging across the room. Silas's hand rested proudly on her waist in the photo, possession disguised as love. "No," Fannie whispered. Actually, for the first time in years, the timing might finally be perfect. 3 days later, Fannie stopped crying completely. That was when people around her became nervous. Silas noticed it first, not because he suddenly cared about her pain, but because silence made him lose visibility. Fannie no longer asked questions at dinner, no longer argued, no longer tried fixing the emotional distance between them. Instead, she watched. And the more she watched, the more terrifying the Grant family became. The penthouse had always looked luxurious before. Now it looked strategic. Every room carefully designed to project power. Every conversation calculated. Every relationship transactional. Even love. Especially love. Fannie sat alone in the living room one afternoon, pretending to scroll through emails while Silas spoke quietly on the phone in his office nearby. The glass walls carried sound more easily than he realized. "She's emotional but manageable," Silas muttered. Fannie's fingers froze on her phone. Manageable. Not heartbroken, not betrayed. Manageable. Like she was a legal complication instead of a wife. "She doesn't know everything yet," he continued. A pause. Then, "No, my mother handled Eleanor years ago." Fannie's heartbeat slowed dangerously. Handled Eleanor. Not helped. Handled. She stayed perfectly still until his office door opened moments later. Silas stepped out, adjusting his cufflinks. "Heading out," he said casually. Fannie looked up with a soft smile. "Busy day." Relief flashed briefly across his face. He still thought she was emotionally collapsing. "Good. Very," he replied. Then he kissed her forehead lightly before leaving. The gesture almost made her sick. The second the elevator doors closed behind him, Fannie moved. Fast. Focused. She walked directly into Silas's office for the first time in months. The room smelled like leather and expensive cologne. Floor-to-ceiling shelves framed the walls beside awards, law degrees, and photographs of Grant family achievements. A shrine to controlled success. Fannie sat at his desk slowly. For years, she had respected boundaries in this marriage. Silas always called privacy important. Now she understood privacy was simply where men hid things. She opened his laptop. Password protected. Of course. But then she paused. Silas used predictable passwords for things he didn't consider threats. Arrogant people usually did. She typed Vivian 1958. Access granted instantly. Fannie stared at the screen in disbelief for half a second, then anger flooded her chest. His mother's name. Not his anniversary, not her birthday. His mother. That explained more about their marriage than therapy ever could. Fannie began searching carefully. Emails, financial files, corporate documents. At first, nothing looked suspicious. Then she found a hidden folder. Private. Inside were records connected to St. Mary's Hospital. Fannie's stomach tightened. Why would a corporate attorney keep 30-year-old hospital files? Her pulse pounded as she opened document after document. Donation ledgers, board communications, legal settlements, and then a scanned payment authorization. Recipient Eleanor Hayes. Date February 1998. Amount $250,000. Fannie stopped breathing. Her mother had been paid. Not recently. Decades ago. Her hands shook violently now. She opened another file. Confidential non-disclosure agreement. Signed by Eleanor Hayes. And one more signature underneath. Vivian Grant. Oh my God. Fannie leaned back slowly in the chair. The room suddenly felt freezing. Vivian didn't just know about the switch. She buried it. Paid to bury it. Fannie remembered Eleanor crying at the kitchen table. I was afraid they'd take you away. Maybe that was true. But fear wasn't the only reason she stayed silent. Money was involved too. The betrayal hit differently this time. Heavier. UGA. Not emotional panic anymore. Corruption, control, power. Then another realization struck her. If Vivian protected the hospital scandal, then the baby switch probably threatened the Grant family somehow. Fannie searched deeper. Finally, she found internal board correspondence from St. Mary's dated November 1994. One sentence immediately stood out. Preserving donor relations must remain the priority. Donor relations. Her blood ran cold. The Grant family had protected their reputation over 2 infants' lives. Fannie suddenly heard footsteps outside the office. She shut the laptop instantly. Her heart slammed against her ribs. But it was only Maria, the housekeeper. Maria paused at the doorway nervously. Mrs. Grant Fannie exhaled slowly. You scared me. Maria hesitated. Mr. Grant forgot his watch. Fannie nodded quickly. He's gone already. Maria stepped closer quietly. Then unexpectedly she lowered her voice. You should be careful. Fannie frowned. What Maria looked toward the hallway before speaking again. This house changes when Mrs. Vivian is angry. Fannie stared at her. Maria had worked for the Grants nearly 12 years. Quiet. Invisible. The kind of woman wealthy families stopped noticing entirely. What do you mean? Fannie asked carefully. Maria hesitated. Then I've seen people disappear from this family very quickly. A chill spread across Fannie's skin. Before she could ask more, Maria shook her head immediately. I shouldn't have said anything. Then she hurried away. Fannie sat frozen in the office. People disappear from this family. The sentence echoed ominously in her mind. Suddenly her phone buzzed. Savannah. Fannie answered immediately. Hey, Savannah sounded exhausted. I almost didn't call. What happened? A pause. Someone contacted me. Fannie straightened instantly. Who a woman named Vivian Grant? Ice flooded her veins. What did she say? Savannah laughed nervously. She offered me money. Of course she did. Fannie closed her eyes slowly. How much a lot? Did you take it, no? Relief hit so hard it almost hurt. Savannah continued softly. She said digging into the past would only hurt people. The exact language powerful families always used. Truth becomes cruelty whenever it threatens wealth. What else? Fannie asked. Another pause. Then Savannah whispered, "She said you were emotionally unstable." Fannie went completely still. There it was, the strategy. Discredit her early, prepare the narrative before the truth surfaced. Suddenly, every conversation with Silas made sense. Overreacting, emotional, spiraling. They weren't dismissing her feelings accidentally. They were building a case, a story. One where Fannie Grant became the irrational wife collapsing under stress. And unstable women were easier to silence. A slow rage spread through her body, not explosive rage, worse, focused rage. Savannah asked carefully, "I'm here." "You okay for the first time in days?" Fannie answered honestly, "No." Silence lingered softly between them. Then Savannah said quietly, "My mom used to say something when people tried controlling her." Fannie leaned back slowly in Silas's chair. What Savannah's voice turned steady. "People only call women crazy when women finally stop obeying." The sentence hit something deep inside Fannie, because suddenly she understood the real danger of awakening. The moment a woman stopped accepting emotional manipulation, everyone benefiting from her silence panicked. Fannie looked around Silas's office one last time. The expensive furniture, the polished lies, the hidden files. Then she opened her phone camera and started photographing everything. Naomi Bennett's office overlooked downtown Manhattan from the 38th floor of a steel and glass tower. The receptionist offered Fannie sparkling water the moment she arrived. Nobody here looked surprised by expensive betrayal. That alone made the place feel different. Fannie sat in the waiting area wearing a cream wool coat and dark sunglasses despite the cloudy morning outside. She hadn't slept much. Again. But exhaustion no longer made her fragile. It made her sharp. Across from her, two women in designer suits quietly discussed custody negotiations while a man near the elevators looked moments away from vomiting into his briefcase. Divorce lived here. Not romance-ending sadness. War. At exactly 10 o'clock, the receptionist smiled politely. "Miss Bennett will see you now." Fannie followed her down a long hallway lined with floor-to-ceiling windows. Naomi Bennett stood inside the corner office, reviewing documents on a tablet. Tall, elegant, unapologetically intimidating. She wore black like it was armor. When she finally looked up at Fannie, her eyes immediately assessed everything. The sleeplessness, the emotional strain, the expensive wedding ring. "Mrs. Grant," Naomi said calmly, "please sit." Fannie obeyed quietly. Naomi remained standing for another moment before speaking again. "I reviewed the brief summary you sent last night." Brief summary. Interesting way to describe a destroyed identity and collapsing marriage. But somehow the clinical language steadied Fannie instead of offending her. Naomi sat across from her. "Your husband is Silas Grant from Grant and Whitmore Legal, yes. And his mother sits on the St. Mary's Hospital donor board, yes." Naomi's expression didn't change, but Fannie noticed something subtle. Interest. Real interest. "Good," Naomi said softly. Fannie blinked. "Good." Naomi folded her hands neatly. Rich people become careless when they think they own the narrative. For the first time in days, Fannie almost smiled. Naomi slid a legal pad across the desk. "Tell me everything." And somehow, Fannie did. For nearly 2 hours, she explained the hospital call Eleanor's confession, the altered record Savannah Vanessa, the affair photo Vivian's intimidation tactics, and the payment documents hidden inside Silas's office. Naomi interrupted only to ask precise questions: dates, amounts, names, patterns. When Fannie finished, silence filled the office briefly. Then Naomi leaned back slowly. "Your husband underestimated you." The sentence startled her. Naomi removed her glasses calmly. Most men in positions like his assume emotional dependency equals intellectual blindness. Fannie looked away quietly. Maybe that had been true once. Naomi continued, "But you noticed patterns." She tapped the legal pad. "The emotional manipulation, the financial imbalance, the institutional cover-up." Fannie swallowed hard. Hearing it spoken plainly made the situation sound even uglier. "This is bigger than infidelity," Naomi said carefully. "I know." "No," Naomi corrected softly. "I don't think you fully do yet." Fannie frowned slightly. Naomi opened a folder already sitting on her desk. "I had my team do a preliminary review of Grant family corporate ties before you arrived." Fannie stared at her. "You already investigated them?" Naomi's expression remained cool. Mrs. Grant wealthy families rarely panic this aggressively unless the secret threatens money. A chill spread through Fannie's body. Naomi slid several papers across the desk. St. Mary's Hospital nearly collapsed financially in the 90s. Fannie scanned the documents quickly. Grant family donations, board restructuring, private settlements, and then a company name, Whitmore Consulting Group, Vanessa Whitmore. Fannie's stomach tightened immediately. "She's connected to the hospital too indirectly," Naomi replied. "Her father helped manage donor restructuring during that period." The room suddenly felt smaller. Everything connected. The affair, the hospital, the donor scandal. Silas hadn't just cheated randomly. Vanessa belonged inside the same power network. Naomi studied her carefully. "You're wondering whether the relationship started emotionally or strategically?" Fannie looked up sharply. "Yes." Naomi gave one small nod. "Good instinct." The words sent a cold wave through Fannie's chest. For years she ignored her instincts whenever they threatened the marriage. Now every buried suspicion resurfaced at once. "How bad is this?" Fannie whispered. Naomi didn't soften her answer. "Potentially catastrophic." Oddly enough, honesty felt comforting now. No manipulation, no minimizing, just truth. Naomi continued flipping through documents. "Your husband likely anticipated divorce long before you discovered the affair." Fannie's throat tightened. "What makes you say that? Financial restructuring?" Naomi pointed toward several highlighted transactions. These accounts were repositioned over the last year. Fannie stared at the numbers. Large transfers, hidden subsidiaries, property movement. Silas had been preparing quietly, while smiling beside her at galas, while sleeping beside her every night. Humiliation burned through her chest again. "He was planning his exit," she whispered. "Yes." Naomi's answer came without hesitation. "And if I had to guess," she added carefully, "he assumed you would emotionally collapse before legally fighting back." The sentence landed hard because it was true. That had been the role Fannie played for years, the forgiving wife, the soft one, the emotional caretaker. Silas probably never imagined she would start collecting evidence instead of apologies. Naomi closed the folder. "So let me be very clear with you." Fannie straightened instinctively. "If you proceed," Naomi said calmly, "this becomes war. Not dramatic, not emotional, certain." Fannie looked down at her wedding ring. For a brief moment, grief flickered again. The old version of her still wanted to ask, "Can this marriage survive?" But another voice inside her had grown louder recently, a stronger voice, one asking a different question entirely. Should it survive? Naomi watched her quietly. "Do you still love him?" Fannie opened her mouth automatically, then stopped, because she suddenly didn't know. Did she love Silas, or did she love the man she spent years trying to believe he was? "That hesitation matters," Naomi said softly. Fannie looked up again. Naomi's expression shifted slightly for the first time. Not softer, but more human. "I've represented women like you for 15 years, she said. "Do you know the most dangerous moment in a toxic marriage?" Fannie shook her head slowly. "When the wife stops begging to be chosen." Silence settled heavily between them, because Fannie understood instantly. That was exactly what was happening. She no longer wanted Silas to love her enough. She wanted the truth more than approval, and people built on control hated that transformation. Naomi stood and walked toward the windows overlooking Manhattan. "Your husband is going to escalate soon." Fannie frowned. "What do you mean he'll either become charming again or crueler?" The accuracy of it made Fannie's skin prickle. "Why? Because control is slipping." Naomi turned toward her again. "And men like Silas Grant don't panic when women cry." Her voice hardened slightly. "They panic when women become strategic." Fannie felt something settle deeply inside her chest. Not peace, purpose. Naomi returned to the desk and handed her a business card. "Starting today, document everything." "I already started." "Good." Naomi gave a faint approving nod. "Emails, calls, financial records, conversations." Then she paused. "And stop underestimating yourself." Fannie almost laughed at that. "You don't know me." "No," Naomi replied calmly, "but I know women trained to confuse kindness with weakness." That sentence hit painfully close. For years, Fannie believed being gentle made her good. Now she realized it also made her easy to exploit. Her phone buzzed suddenly. "Silas!" Naomi glanced at the screen. "Aren't you going to answer?" Fannie stared at his name for several seconds. Then she silenced the call. Something cold and powerful flashed behind Naomi's eyes. "There she is," Naomi murmured softly. Fannie frowned slightly. "Who?" Naomi leaned back in her chair. "The woman your husband should have been afraid of from the beginning." Eleanor Hayes looked smaller than Fannie remembered. Not physically, emotionally, like guilt had been slowly folding her inward for 30 years. Rain tapped softly against the windows of the old colonial house while Eleanor sat at the kitchen table twisting trembling fingers together. Fannie stood near the counter holding the copied documents from Silas's office. The payment records, the NDA, Vivian Grant's signature, proof, real proof. "You took the money," Fannie said quietly. Eleanor closed her eyes instantly. Not denial, not confusion, shame. The silence hurt more than yelling would have. Finally, Eleanor whispered, "Yes." Fannie felt the answer like a physical blow despite already knowing it. "How much? 250,000. The number echoed through the kitchen. $250,000. That was the price attached to Fannie's stolen identity. Her throat tightened painfully. "All these years," she whispered. "Every birthday, every holiday, every time you looked me in the eye." Tears slid down Eleanor's face immediately. "I hated myself for it." "But you still cashed the check." The cruelty in Fannie's voice shocked even her, but she couldn't stop. Not anymore, because every memory felt contaminated now. Eleanor pressed trembling fingers against her mouth. "You have to understand." "No!" Fannie snapped suddenly. "That's what everyone keeps saying before they justify destroying me." Eleanor flinched hard. Good, a dark part of Fannie thought. Good. For years she absorbed everyone else's damage quietly. Now the truth finally had somewhere to land. "The hospital contacted me 3 months after the birth," Eleanor whispered shakily. "They admitted there'd been a mistake." Fannie crossed her arms tightly, and they said fixing it publicly would become catastrophic. Catastrophic for who Eleanor looked down. There were lawyers involved already. Vivian. A weak nod. Fannie laughed bitterly under her breath. Of course, Vivian Grant probably entered rooms like a hurricane wrapped in pearls. What did she say to you? Eleanor looked sick remembering it. She came here herself. Fannie froze. What? She sat exactly where you're sitting now. The image alone made Fannie's skin crawl. Vivian in this warm little kitchen, bringing corporate-style destruction into Eleanor's ordinary life. She told me switching the babies back would traumatize everyone involved, Eleanor whispered. She said the media would destroy the children later if it became public. Fannie's jaw tightened. Manipulation disguised as concern. Classic Vivian. And the money Eleanor broke completely then. I was drowning. The words exploded out of her. Raw, ugly, honest. Fannie blinked slowly. Eleanor wiped tears from her face with shaking hands. Your father had already left, she whispered. Bills were everywhere. I was terrified all the time. Fannie stayed silent. Not because she forgave her, because suddenly she saw her mother differently. Not evil, weak. And weakness could destroy people just as effectively. They told me the babies were healthy, Eleanor continued. They told me you were safe. You, not her real daughter. The distinction hurt unexpectedly. I convinced myself blood didn't matter, Eleanor whispered. Because I loved you. Fannie looked away sharply. That was the hardest part. The love was real. Messy, selfish, cowardly, but real. Eleanor suddenly stood and walked toward the hallway cabinet. I need to show you something. Fannie hesitated before following. Eleanor pulled out an old photo album with worn edges. Inside were hundreds of pictures. Baby Fannie wrapped in blankets. Toddler Fannie painting messy watercolors. First birthdays. Halloween costumes. Christmas mornings. Every page overflowed with love. Fannie's chest ached so hard she almost couldn't breathe. You were my daughter, Eleanor whispered. Every single day. Tears burned behind Fannie's eyes immediately, because part of her still believed that too. And maybe that was the cruelest tragedy of all. Two truths existed at once. Eleanor loved her deeply. Eleanor betrayed her completely. Fannie closed the album carefully. Did you ever try finding Savannah? Eleanor nodded slowly, a few times. And I stopped. Why, Eleanor's face crumpled again. Because I was afraid you'd leave me. The honesty stunned Fannie silent, not because it excused anything, because it was so painfully human. Fear. Everything came back to fear. Eleanor feared abandonment. Silas feared losing control. Vivian feared losing power. And somehow Fannie had spent her entire life paying the emotional bill for everyone else's fear. You should have trusted me enough to tell me, Fannie whispered. Eleanor looked shattered. I know. The room fell quiet again. Then Fannie finally asked the question haunting her for days. Did Vivian threaten you? Eleanor froze instantly. That hesitation answered everything. Fannie stepped closer slowly. What did she do? Eleanor sat back down heavily. She said families like theirs destroy people quietly. Chills spread across Fannie's arms. She told me nobody would believe me over the Grants. That part was probably true. Money rewrote reality constantly. She said if I pushed the issue, Eleanor whispered, you would grow up hated. Fannie closed her eyes briefly. Vivian always understood exactly where to cut people emotionally. Then Eleanor added softly, and she said I'd lose you anyway. The sentence hung heavily between them. Fannie suddenly realized something horrifying. Vivian didn't just manipulate situations. She studied emotional vulnerabilities like strategy. She found fear and weaponized it. No wonder Silas became who he was. He'd been raised inside emotional warfare disguised as sophistication. Eleanor reached across the table carefully. I know you hate me right now." Fanny looked at her mother's trembling hand, then slowly moved her own away. Not cruelly, just honestly. "I don't know what I feel." Eleanor nodded through tears. "That's fair." For several moments neither woman spoke. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows. Finally, Fanny asked quietly, "Did you ever regret keeping me?" Eleanor looked horrified instantly. "Never!" The answer came too quickly to fake. Not once. Fanny swallowed hard, and suddenly memories hit her all at once. Soup when she was sick, late-night talks after heartbreaks, Eleanor cheering louder than anyone at graduation. Love existed here, even buried beneath lies. Fanny's eyes filled despite herself. "You made me feel safe," she whispered brokenly. Eleanor started crying harder. "Because you were my baby." The sentence shattered something inside Fanny. Because deep down, despite biology and betrayal and corrupted paperwork, part of her still wanted to believe it. Then her phone buzzed on the table. Silas. Again. Eleanor wiped her tears quickly. "Does he know you're here?" "Yes. Be careful." Fanny looked up sharply. "You think I don't know that already?" "No," Eleanor whispered. "You still don't understand how dangerous powerful families become when they're cornered." The warning settled heavily in the room. Fanny stared at the ringing phone for several seconds before answering. Silas's voice came instantly. "Where are you at my mother's? You left without telling me." Fanny almost laughed. Interesting how controlling men confused access with entitlement. "What do you want, Silas A.?" Pause. Then his voice softened artificially. "We should talk privately, not lovingly, strategically." Fanny recognized the difference now. "You mean before I learn more?" Another silence. "Too long. Then you're listening to the wrong people." Fanny looked at Eleanor sitting across from her. Broken, ashamed, human. Then she thought about Vivian, the payments, the threats, the manipulation. "No," Fanny said quietly. "For the first time in my life," her voice steadied completely, "I think I'm finally listening to the right ones." Then she hung up. And somewhere deep inside herself, Fanny felt the last fragile piece of blind loyalty finally break. The Grant Foundation Winter Gala took place at the Halstead Ballroom 3 nights later. By 7 o'clock, Manhattan's elite had already filled the marble entrance beneath glittering chandeliers and cascading white orchids. Women in couture gowns floated across polished floors, while men in tailored tuxedos discussed investments over champagne. Everything looked breathtaking. That was the point. Powerful people preferred beautiful rooms when hiding ugly truths. Fanny stepped out of the black car slowly, wearing a silver satin gown that clung elegantly to her figure. Diamond earrings caught the camera flashes waiting outside the venue. For a moment, reporters swarmed instantly. "Mrs. Grant, Fanny over here. Are the rumors about St. Mary's true?" She smiled softly without answering. Inside, Naomi Bennett walked beside her in a sharp black dress that looked more like armor than fashion. "You ready?" Naomi asked quietly. Fanny glanced around the ballroom. Crystal glasses, fake smiles, Grant family money everywhere. "No," she answered honestly. Naomi almost smirked. "Good. Fear keeps people careful." At the far end of the ballroom, Vivian Grant stood near the donor stage, greeting hospital executives like royalty. Emerald silk wrapped perfectly around her thin frame, while diamonds glittered at her throat. Silas stood beside her, handsome, composed, deadly calm. When his eyes landed on Fanny entering with Naomi, his expression changed instantly. Not love, alarm. Good. Let him feel uncertain for once. Vivian recovered first, of course. She approached gracefully with her usual polished smile. "Fanny," she said warmly, as if they hadn't spent weeks emotionally destroying each other, "you look beautiful tonight." Fannie held her gaze calmly. So do you. The air between them felt poisonous. Vivian's eyes flicked briefly toward Naomi. And who is this Naomi Bennett? Naomi answered herself smoothly. Attorney. The word landed exactly as intended. Vivian's smile tightened almost invisibly. Silas stepped forward quickly. Can we talk privately? No, Fannie replied immediately. His jaw flexed. Interesting. She was learning how much men hated losing control in public. You're making a mistake, Silas said quietly. Fannie tilted her head slightly. That depends who you ask. Before he could answer, another voice interrupted behind them. Fannie Savannah. The ballroom suddenly felt still. Savannah Cole stood near the entrance, wearing a simple navy dress that contrasted sharply against the polished wealth surrounding her. She looked uncomfortable but determined. Several nearby donors turned subtly to stare. Not because Savannah looked inappropriate, because she looked real. Vivian's face lost color instantly. Silas muttered under his breath, What the hell is she doing here? Fannie turned toward him slowly. Existing. Savannah approached carefully. The sisters looked at each other awkwardly for half a second before Fannie hugged her gently. The gesture sent visible shock across Vivian's face, because powerful families relied on division, and the women they hurt were not supposed to unite. You came, Fannie whispered. Savannah nodded nervously. I almost threw up in the car. Fannie laughed softly for the first time in weeks. A real laugh. Silas noticed. That bothered him too. A man from the hospital board quickly approached Vivian, whispering anxiously in her ear. Fannie caught only fragments. Reporters. Legal exposure. Why is she here? Fear. Good. Let them feel it. Vivian recovered quickly and smiled toward Savannah with terrifying politeness. Miss Cole, she said smoothly, I'm sorry your family has been dragged into this confusion. Confusion. Interesting choice. Savannah straightened slightly. With respect, she replied quietly, I think your family dragged us into it. Naomi hid a faint smile. Vivian's eyes sharpened immediately. There she is, Fannie thought. The real Vivian. Cold beneath the pearls. A photographer nearby snapped pictures rapidly. Silas noticed instantly and lowered his voice dangerously. Fannie, stop this now. Stop this. As if truth itself was inappropriate. Fannie looked around the ballroom carefully. Doctors, donors, politicians, media, all gathered to celebrate St. Mary's Hospital, a hospital that buried two women's identities for 30 years. Something inside her hardened completely. A live orchestra played softly near the stage, while waiters circulated with champagne. The entire room looked cinematic, beautiful enough to distract people from corruption. Then Vivian stepped toward Fannie again. Her voice lowered. You are humiliating yourself. Fannie smiled faintly. No, she whispered. I think I'm humiliating the right people for the first time. Vivian's composure cracked briefly, tiny, but visible. Silas immediately stepped between them slightly, protecting his mother. Of course, always his mother, never his wife. Enough, he said quietly. Fannie looked directly at him. You knew who I was. Silas's face hardened. You're emotional. The sentence no longer hurt her now. It sounded pathetic, predictable. Fannie leaned closer slightly. And you're scared. That one hit. She saw it instantly, because fear lived behind his calm now. Not fear of losing her. Fear of exposure. Naomi checked her watch subtly. It's time, she murmured. At the far end of the ballroom, the event coordinator approached the stage microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, the woman announced warmly, thank you for supporting another incredible year of healing and hope through St. Mary's Hospital. Healing and hope. Fannie almost laughed. The irony was vicious. Vivian moved toward the stage elegantly as applause filled the room. Silas grabbed Fanny's wrist quietly before she could move. His grip wasn't violent, just controlling, instinctive. "Don't do this," he whispered. For one dangerous second, old instincts almost resurfaced, the version of Fanny trained to preserve peace, to avoid scenes, to prioritize love over dignity. Then she remembered the hidden files, the affair, the gaslighting, the stolen identity, the years spent shrinking herself to fit inside someone else's comfort. And suddenly his grip felt unbearable. Fanny gently pulled her wrist free. "You should have told me the truth when you still had the chance." Silas's voice dropped colder. "If you embarrass this family publicly, there's no coming back." Family. Interesting word again. Because suddenly Fanny realized something profound. The Grant family never loved unconditionally. Love inside this world was transactional, protective only toward people serving the system. The moment someone threatened the image, they became disposable. Fanny looked at Savannah standing nearby, nervous, brave, real. Then she looked at Naomi, calm, prepared. Finally, she looked at Vivian stepping onto the stage beneath golden lights while donors applauded like she was some benevolent queen. No more fear, just clarity. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly as Vivian began speaking gracefully into the microphone. For decades, Vivian said warmly, St. Mary's has represented integrity, compassion, and family. Fanny started walking toward the stage. Silas immediately followed. Fanny. She didn't stop. Fanny. People turned to stare now. The orchestra faltered uncertainly. Vivian noticed too late. Fanny stepped onto the stage beside her. The room went silent. Complete silence. Vivian's smile froze instantly beneath the lights. "Fanny," she said sharply under her breath. But Fanny calmly reached for the microphone. Her hand stopped shaking now. Funny. After enough pain, fear eventually burned away. She looked out across the glittering ballroom filled with wealthy strangers. Then she spoke clearly. "Tonight," Fanny said softly, "before this hospital celebrates healing." Her eyes locked onto Vivian. "I think we should talk about the babies it buried under donor money." And suddenly the entire room stopped breathing. Silence swallowed the ballroom whole. Even the orchestra had stopped playing. Hundreds of wealthy guests stood frozen beneath crystal chandeliers while Fannie Grant held the microphone with terrifying calm. Across the stage, Vivian Grant's polished smile finally cracked. "Just slightly, but enough." Fanny Vivian said quietly, through clenched teeth, step away from the microphone. Fanny looked at her. For years, that voice had intimidated her, controlled her, made her feel small. Tonight it sounded desperate. "No," Fanny answered calmly. Camera flashes exploded instantly from the back of the ballroom as reporters surged forward. Silas moved toward the stage quickly. "This event is over," he snapped toward staff members. But panic had already spread through the room. Because rich people understood one thing better than anyone, scandal moved faster than money could contain. Fanny looked out at the crowd. Hospital board members, donors, judges, politicians, people who spent years applauding institutions while ignoring what those institutions buried. Her pulse should have been racing. Instead, she felt strangely clear. "My name is Fannie Grant," she said steadily into the microphone. "And 30 years ago, St. Mary's Hospital switched me at birth with another baby girl." Murmurs exploded instantly. Several guests exchanged horrified looks. Others pulled out phones immediately. Vivian stepped closer, voice low and venomous. "You are embarrassing yourself." Fanny turned toward her slowly. "No," she said softly. "I think truth is embarrassing you." The ballroom reacted audibly to that. Silas grabbed Fannie's arm suddenly, hard enough to warn her. Not hard enough to leave marks, the perfect balance wealthy men mastered. "Stop," he whispered sharply. Fannie looked down at his hand on her arm, then calmly removed it. The tiny rejection visibly rattled him. Naomi Bennett stepped forward immediately beside the stage. "Touch her again," she said coolly, "and I'll add intimidation to the lawsuit." The word lawsuit hit the room like gasoline. Reporters moved even closer now. Vivian's composure began cracking faster. "There is no lawsuit," she snapped. Naomi raised one elegant eyebrow. "That confidence feels premature." Fannie almost smiled. Across the ballroom, Savannah stood near the center aisle, clutching a folder tightly against her chest, nervous, but standing tall. Fannie continued speaking. "For 30 years," she said into the microphone, "the hospital and several influential people knowingly concealed altered birth records connected to donor interests." A hospital board member immediately interrupted from the audience. "That accusation is outrageous." Fannie nodded calmly. "It would be." Then Savannah slowly walked toward the stage. The ballroom parted for her instinctively. People stared openly now, not at a scandal anymore, at the human cost of one. Savannah climbed the steps carefully beside Fannie. Their eyes met briefly, sisters, strangers, victims, together. Savannah handed Fannie the folder with trembling hands. Inside were copies of the original maternity records photographs, donor communications, and the payment agreement Eleanor signed decades earlier. Real evidence. Not emotion, not rumors. Proof. Fannie held up the document slightly. "These are copies of the original files before they were altered." The ballroom erupted into chaos. Questions flew everywhere. "Oh my God, is this real? Who authorized this?" Vivian stepped directly toward the microphone. "This is a private family matter being exploited emotionally by unstable people." Unstable. There it was again. The word powerful people used whenever women stopped behaving conveniently. But this time it didn't work, because Fannie wasn't crying. She wasn't screaming. She was composed, and controlled women terrified manipulative people. Naomi stepped beside the stage calmly. "We also have evidence of financial settlements tied to non-disclosure agreements connected to St. Mary's board members." Several reporters immediately turned toward Vivian. "Mrs. Grant, did you authorize payments to conceal the switch?" Vivian's face hardened instantly. No comment. Wrong answer. The room shifted immediately. Fannie saw it happen in real time. The donors backing away subtly, the executives whispering nervously, the moment people sensed power cracking. Silas stepped in front of Fannie again, voice dangerously low. "You don't understand what you're doing." Fannie looked directly into his eyes. For the first time in their marriage, she saw fear there. Real fear. Not for her, for himself. "You're right," she whispered softly. "I finally understand what you did." That landed harder than yelling ever could, because truth stripped away performance. Silas lowered his voice further. "We can still fix this privately. Privately, always privately, where powerful men controlled narratives." Fannie shook her head slowly. No more private suffering to protect public reputations. The ballroom erupted into applause somewhere near the back. Unexpected, sharp. A woman in a dark blue gown stood first, then another, then several more. Fannie blinked in surprise. Women, mostly women, watching her, understanding her, because almost every woman recognized emotional manipulation when she finally saw it clearly enough. Vivian noticed too. That frightened her even more than the lawsuit. Public sympathy changing sides. A reporter suddenly called out, "Mr. Grant, did you know about the switch before your wife Silas hesitated? Fatal mistake." The ballroom noticed instantly. Fannie closed her eyes briefly. There it was, the truth finally bleeding through the cracks. "Yes," Silas admitted tightly. The reaction was immediate. Gasps, whispers, judgment. Another reporter shouted, "How long did you know? About a year?" Savannah looked horrified beside Fannie. Even Naomi's expression darkened slightly, because somehow that betrayal sounded uglier aloud. A year, a full year of lies. The cameras captured everything. Silas finally looked angry now, at Fannie, at the media, at losing control. "This situation is more complicated than people understand." Fannie almost laughed. Complicated. Another soft word hiding cruelty. Then Vivian made the mistake that destroyed the last illusion protecting her. She turned toward Savannah coldly. "You should have taken the money quietly." The ballroom froze. Completely. Vivian realized too late what she'd admitted. Savannah stared at her in shock. "You offered me money?" Camera flashes exploded violently now. Hospital executives looked physically ill. Naomi whispered softly beside Fannie, "And there it is. Self-destruction. Arrogant people always believed power would save them until the very last second." Vivian recovered quickly. Too quickly. "I meant support," she snapped sharply. But nobody believed her anymore, because once truth cracks open, people start reevaluating everything. Fannie looked around the ballroom slowly. All these years she thought power belonged to families like the Grants. Money, status, control. But she understood something different now. Truth was power too, especially when spoken publicly. A young female reporter near the stage suddenly asked softly, "Mrs. Grant, why speak now?" The ballroom quieted again. Fannie thought about that question carefully. Then she looked toward Silas, toward Vivian, toward the entire institution that trained her to stay small. Finally, she answered honestly, "Because manipulative people survive by convincing women their pain is inconvenient." The room stayed silent. Fannie's voice steadied even more. "And I realized something." She looked directly at the cameras now. "A woman being kind does not make her weak." Something shifted across the ballroom. Emotional gravity. Women wiping tears quietly, men looking uncomfortable. Power changing shape in real time. Then suddenly Naomi's phone buzzed. She glanced down and smiled slowly. "Interesting," what Fannie whispered. Naomi looked up calmly. "The FBI just opened a formal inquiry into St. Mary's financial records." The room exploded. Hospital executives panicked instantly. Board members began shouting. Reporters surged forward aggressively. And across the chaos, Fannie saw Vanessa Whitmore near the ballroom entrance, watching everything. The moment Silas noticed her, he moved instinctively toward Vanessa, not toward his wife, not toward damage control, toward the woman he actually wanted. Fannie stared at him, and suddenly she felt nothing, not heartbreak, not jealousy, just clarity. Because at last the illusion was dead, and sometimes losing the illusion hurts less than continuing to live inside it. 3 weeks later, Silas Grant looked exhausted for the first time in his adult life. Not tired, exposed. There was a difference. The FBI investigation into St. Mary's Hospital had exploded across national media faster than anyone predicted. Headlines dissected donor corruption, altered birth records, and financial cover-ups tied to elite families. The Grant name was everywhere now, not on charity plaques, on news channels, and suddenly the family that spent decades controlling narratives could no longer control the internet. Fannie watched everything quietly from Naomi Bennett's office. The television mounted across the wall displayed another breaking segment. Multiple financial entities connected to Grant and Whitmore Legal are now under federal review. Silas's photo flashed across the screen. Older, sharper, still handsome. But now people saw something else beneath it. Predatory calm. Naomi muted the television. "He's losing public sympathy faster than expected," she said casually. Fannie sat at the conference table reviewing divorce documents. It still felt surreal sometimes. 10 years of marriage reduced to asset division and legal language. Then again, maybe that was always what the marriage truly meant to Silas. A merger. Naomi slid another folder toward her. Hidden accounts. Fannie opened it slowly. The numbers were staggering. Private transfers, shell corporations, luxury purchases routed through consulting entities. And there buried beneath pages of transactions Vanessa Whitmore. Payments, trips, property access. 8 months of betrayal documented in spreadsheets. Fannie should have cried. Instead, she just felt tired. "You were right," Naomi said quietly. "He was preparing long before you knew." Fannie stared at the paperwork silently. "What hurts most," she admitted softly, "is realizing how carefully he planned my ignorance." Naomi nodded once. "That's how control works." The office fell quiet. Outside the windows, Manhattan moved endlessly beneath gray winter skies. Life continuing despite personal destruction. Fannie used to think heartbreak would stop the world. Instead, the world kept moving while you learned how to breathe differently. Her phone buzzed. "Savannah." Fannie smiled faintly before answering. "Hey." Savannah sounded exhausted but warmer lately. "How's divorce war?" Fannie laughed softly. "There are easier ways to suffer." "Good. Humor means you're healing." The sentence surprised her. Healing. Was that what this was? It still felt more like demolition. Savannah continued. "I talked to another reporter today. You okay?" "Yeah." A pause. "Then I think Mom and Dad would have liked you." The words hit unexpectedly hard. Fannie looked down immediately, because no matter how much anger existed, grief still lived underneath it. People who should have known her, loved her, gone forever. "I wish I'd met them," she whispered. Savannah's voice softened. "They would have loved you anyway." Tears burned suddenly behind Fannie's eyes, because that sentence carried something she rarely experienced around the Grants. Unconditional humanity, no performance, no status, just kindness. Naomi watched her carefully from across the room while pretending not to listen. Fannie wiped quickly beneath one eye. "When is your hearing?" Savannah asked. "Tomorrow. You nervous?" Fannie thought about it honestly, then looked at the stack of financial evidence against Silas. "No," she said quietly, and for the first time it was true. The next morning, Silas arrived at the mediation office wearing navy cashmere and controlled irritation. His image consultants were working overtime lately. Softer ties, less aggressive interviews, public statements about respecting privacy during painful family circumstances. It almost would have worked if Fannie hadn't seen the real version of him already. He entered the conference room and stopped when he saw her. Something flickered across his face. Not love, recognition. Like he was finally realizing the woman sitting across from him was no longer predictable. "You look well," he said carefully. Fannie closed her folder calmly. "So do you, considering the FBI situation." His jaw tightened instantly. Good. Let him feel uncomfortable too. Naomi entered moments later carrying additional files. "Shall we begin?" The mediation attorney started speaking about asset distribution, real estate holdings, and corporate ownership structures. Fannie barely listened at first, until Silas interrupted. I'm willing to offer a generous settlement. Generous. Interesting word. Like he was rewarding her for surviving betrayal politely. Naomi looked unimpressed. We're not here for generosity, she replied smoothly. We're here for equitable disclosure. Silas's expression cooled immediately. The mediator attempted a nervous smile. Perhaps we can keep this collaborative. Naomi almost looked amused. Collaborative ended around the time my client's husband started hiding money and sleeping with consultants. The room went silent. Silas stared at Fannie sharply. You told her everything. Fannie met his gaze evenly. No, the financial records told her everything. That one landed. Silas leaned back slowly in his chair. You're enjoying this. The accusation startled her. Then she realized something profound. Men often interpreted female self-protection as cruelty because they benefited from women lacking boundaries. No, Fannie said quietly. I'm surviving this. Silas's eyes darkened. You think these people actually care about you? He asked coldly. Naomi. The reporters? Savannah. The attack pattern had shifted now. Isolation. Make her distrust support systems. Fannie recognized it immediately. She's using you, he continued. Naomi didn't even blink. Fannie looked at Silas carefully. For years, his intelligence intimidated her. Now it just looked manipulative. You know what's sad? She asked softly. Silas frowned slightly. You still think emotional control is the same thing as emotional intelligence. The mediator shifted awkwardly. Naomi hid the faintest smile. Silas exhaled sharply. You've changed. Yes. The simplicity of the answer unsettled him more than anger would have. Naomi opened another file slowly. Now she said calmly, let's discuss the hidden Manhattan account connected to Whitmore Consulting. Silas froze. Finally. Real panic. Brief, but visible. Fannie saw it instantly. There is no hidden account, he replied carefully. Naomi slid the bank records across the table. There absolutely is. Silence. Heavy silence. The mediator looked physically uncomfortable now. Fannie stared at the documents while realization settled deeper. Silas truly believed he'd outsmarted everyone. That arrogance destroyed powerful men more often than enemies ever did. Naomi continued speaking calmly. We also have documentation connecting marital funds to travel expenses associated with Ms. Vanessa Whitmore. Another silence. Then something unexpected happened. Silas looked at Fannie directly, not coldly this time, almost desperately. We can still fix this. The room froze slightly. Naomi leaned back slowly. Fannie stared at him in disbelief. Fix this after lies. After betrayal. After treating her emotional devastation like inconvenience. What exactly are you trying to save? She asked quietly. Silas swallowed hard. Our marriage? The answer sounded empty, like even he no longer believed it fully. Fannie studied the man she once loved more than herself, and suddenly she realized something heartbreaking. Silas did not miss her. He missed access to admiration, access to control, access to the version of himself reflected through her loyalty. You confused my kindness with dependence, Fannie said softly. The sentence hit him like a physical strike, because it was true. For years, Silas mistook patience for weakness, sacrifice for submission, love for permission. And now the woman he underestimated sat across from him, holding evidence capable of destroying everything he built. The mediator cleared his throat nervously. We should probably take a short break. But before anyone could move, Naomi's phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen, then looked up slowly. Interesting.
What now?
Silas asked sharply. Naomi's expression remained perfectly calm. Your mother was just removed from the St. Mary's board. Silas went completely still, and for the first time since this war began, Fannie watched the Grant family truly start to collapse. Silence in the mediation room didn't just linger this time, it expanded, heavy, suffocating. Silas Grant sat motionless for the first time since Fannie had known him, his perfectly controlled posture slipping just slightly at the edges. Removed, he repeated finally, as if the word itself didn't make sense. Naomi Bennett didn't react. Effective immediately, she said calmly. St. Mary's board voted unanimously after the federal inquiry expanded. Silas let out a short laugh, but there was no humor in it, only disbelief. That's impossible, he said. My mother built half that board. Naomi tilted her head slightly, then she should have built it on something stronger than silence and payments. Fannie watched him carefully. This was new. Not the confident attorney, not the controlling husband, not the man who always had the next move planned. This version of Silas looked destabilized, human. For a second, something inside Fannie almost softened. Almost. But then she remembered everything. The hidden accounts, Vanessa, the year-long betrayal, the way he spoke about her like she was manageable. And the softness disappeared again. Silas turned slowly toward Fannie. His voice dropped. This is what you wanted. Fannie blinked slowly. What I wanted? She repeated quietly. Yes, he said sharper now. This destruction, this humiliation. Fannie almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. I didn't want destruction, she said softly. I wanted truth. Silas stared at her for a long moment. Then his expression hardened again, like he was forcing control back into place. Truth doesn't require public execution, he said. Naomi interjected smoothly. No, but accountability does. Silas ignored her. His focus stayed locked on Fannie. You're letting outsiders rewrite our entire life, he said. Our life. That word hit differently now. Fannie felt something shift inside her chest. Not pain, clarity. There is no our life anymore, she said quietly. Silas frowned slightly. You're emotional right now. That sentence again. The old reflex. The old Silas. But Fannie didn't react this time. Instead, she simply looked at him. Really looked, and saw it clearly. He wasn't trying to understand her. He was trying to regain control of the narrative. Always control. Even now. Fannie exhaled slowly. You know what I finally understand? She asked. Silas didn't respond, because he didn't like questions he couldn't direct. Fannie continued anyway. I spent years thinking love meant staying calm in chaos, she said softly. But I think I confused silence with strength. Naomi nodded slightly from across the table. Silas's jaw tightened. Where is this coming from? He asked. Fannie smiled faintly. From finally listening to myself instead of everyone who benefits from my silence. That landed. Hard. Silas leaned back slightly in his chair, studying her now with something closer to calculation again. You think Naomi is helping you? He asked. Fannie didn't answer immediately, because she saw what he was doing, divide, isolate, undermine trust. But something had changed in her. She no longer needed to defend everyone she trusted. Naomi answered for her. I'm helping her build a case, she said evenly. You don't need to be liked for that. Silas looked at Naomi now, properly, assessing. Cold attorney versus cold attorney. Then he turned back to Fannie. His voice softened slightly. "Do you really believe this ends well for you?" Fannie paused, not because she was afraid, but because she was thinking. And then she said something that surprised even herself. "I don't think I care about well the way I used to." Silas frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means I stopped measuring my life by whether men approve of it." Silence again. But this time it wasn't heavy. It was awakening. Naomi stood slowly. "I need to make a call," she said, stepping out of the room. The door closed softly behind her. Now it was just Fannie and Silas, for the first time in years. No audience, no mediation structure, no family pressure. Just truth sitting across from truth. Silas leaned forward slightly, his voice lowered. "Vanessa was never the point," he said quietly. Fannie blinked slowly. "Oh, I needed clarity," he continued. "You were drifting emotionally for years." There it was, the justification phase. Fannie almost felt a strange sense of familiarity. This was the pattern. Always. Pain, justification. Blame, redistribution. "You always say that," she said softly. Silas frowned. "Say what, that I was drifting?" she replied, as if my reaction to being dismissed was the problem instead of the symptom. Silas exhaled sharply. "You're rewriting history." Fannie shook her head. "No," she said quietly. "I'm finally reading it without your edits." That sentence changed something in the room. Silas went still again, because he realized she wasn't arguing anymore. She was documenting reality, and people like him didn't know how to negotiate with that. Silas stood slowly. "I can still fix this," he said again, quieter this time. Fannie looked up at him, really looked, and for the first time she didn't feel pulled toward him. She felt distant, like watching a memory instead of living inside it. "You keep saying that," she said softly. Silas stepped closer. "We can leave this room right now and fix everything privately," he insisted. "No more media, no more lawyers, just us, just us." That phrase used to feel safe. Now it felt like erasure. Fannie stood slowly. Silas's eyes followed her immediately. "We had something real," he said. Fannie paused, then answered honestly, "I think we had something controlled." Silas's expression tightened. "That's not fair." Fannie nodded slightly. "I know." Silence again. Then she added, "But it's accurate." The mediator's door opened briefly down the hall. Voices echoed faintly, but inside this room everything felt suspended. Silas spoke again, softer now. "Do you love me at all anymore?" The question hung between them, finally stripped of strategy. Fannie considered it carefully, and for the first time she answered without fear of consequence. "I think I loved the version of you I believed in." Silas looked like that hurt, which surprised her, because she used to think he didn't feel things deeply. Now she realized he just hid them differently. "But that version never made real decisions," she added quietly. Silas swallowed. "And me?" he asked. Fannie hesitated, then said, "You made all the real decisions. That was the difference." Silas looked down for a moment. When he looked up again, something had changed. Less arrogance, more urgency. "You're going to regret this," he said quietly. Fannie nodded once. "Maybe." Then she added, "But I'll never regret waking up." Silas stared at her for several seconds, then stepped back slowly, like he was realizing something was permanently lost, not just her, control. Outside, Naomi returned. She glanced between them immediately. "Ready?" she asked Fannie. Fannie picked up her bag, and for the first time in her life she didn't look back at him when she walked away. Silas didn't stop her this time, because somewhere deep down even he understood. Some exits are not negotiations. They are endings. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and winter air trying to sneak through sealed windows. Eleanor Hayes looked smaller than ever lying beneath the white sheets, her hands folded neatly over her chest like she was trying to take up less space even in rest. Fannie stood at the doorway for a long moment before stepping inside. For days she had built armor, evidence, strategy, distance. But none of that mattered in this room, because Eleanor wasn't Vivian Grant. She wasn't Silas. She wasn't a system of control. She was just a woman who had loved badly and paid for it in silence. Eleanor turned her head slowly when she noticed Fannie. "Hey," she whispered. Fannie didn't answer immediately. She pulled a chair closer and sat down beside the bed. The silence between them wasn't hostile anymore. It was heavy in a different way. Human. Finally, Fannie spoke quietly. They removed Vivian from the board. Eleanor blinked slowly like she needed a moment to understand. Then she nodded faintly. She won't go quietly, she said. Fannie almost smiled. Neither did I. That earned a weak, tired breath from Eleanor that might have been a laugh once. Then silence returned. Fannie studied her mother carefully, the same woman who had raised her, the same woman who had lied to her, the same woman who had protected her with one hand while accepting silence money with the other. "You knew how this would end," Fannie said softly. Eleanor closed her eyes. "I hoped it wouldn't." "That's not an answer." Eleanor swallowed. "No," she admitted, "but it's the only one I have left." Fannie leaned back in the chair slowly. Outside the window, snow drifted past New York City like scattered ash. "I met Savannah in person," Fannie said after a moment. Eleanor opened her eyes again immediately. "And she's nothing like I expected." That surprised Eleanor. "Good or bad?" Fannie hesitated. "Real." A pause. Then Eleanor whispered, "That's what I was afraid of?" Fannie frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Eleanor turned her head toward the ceiling. "Because real things are harder to control." The words hung there, heavy, accurate. Fannie exhaled slowly. "You didn't just lie to protect me," she said. "You lied because you were scared of losing control, too." Eleanor didn't deny it. That silence said everything. After a moment, Eleanor spoke again, softer. "Do you hate me?" The question wasn't dramatic. It was tired, honest. Fannie looked at her for a long time, and for the first time she didn't respond from anger. She responded from truth. "I don't know what hate would even fix at this point." Eleanor's eyes filled immediately. "I didn't mean for your life to become this," she whispered. Fannie nodded slowly. "I believe that." Then quieter, but it still did. Silence again, this time softer, less jagged. Eleanor reached out slightly, her hand hovering before touching Fannie's wrist carefully. Fannie didn't pull away. That small moment made Eleanor cry harder, not loudly, just quietly collapsing inward. "I loved you every day," she whispered, "even when I was wrong." Fannie felt something break inside her chest again. Not destruction, release. Because she finally understood something she had been resisting. Love and harm can exist in the same person, at the same time, without canceling each other out. That was the hardest truth. Fannie squeezed her mother's hand gently. "I know," she said quietly. Eleanor looked at her in disbelief. "You do?" Fannie nodded. "But knowing doesn't erase consequences." Eleanor closed her eyes again. "I wouldn't ask it to." Another long silence followed. Then Fannie spoke again. "I'm filing the final divorce papers tomorrow." Eleanor nodded slowly, and Silas Fannie looked down at her hands. "He's losing control of everything he built around perception." Eleanor exhaled faintly. Men like him don't survive that easily. Fanny looked up. Neither did you. That line landed softly. Not cruel, not kind, just true. Eleanor gave a weak nod. No, she whispered, I didn't. Fanny stood slowly. Eleanor panicked slightly. Are you leaving? Fanny paused, then shook her head. No. She looked at her mother carefully. I'm just not staying in the version of this that destroys me anymore. Eleanor's breathing steadied slightly. That's fair, she whispered. Fanny reached into her bag and placed a small folder on the bedside table. What's that? Eleanor asked. Copies of Savannah's records, Fanny said. She deserves access to everything we buried. Eleanor stared at it, then nodded. I agree. That surprised Fanny slightly, but Eleanor added softly, for what it's worth. She seems stronger than both of us. A faint, almost sad smile crossed Fanny's face. Yeah, she whispered. She does. Later that night, Fanny stood alone in her penthouse again. But everything felt different now. The city outside wasn't intimidating anymore. It was just large, neutral, alive without her permission. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Silas. Again. She stared at the name for a long time. No fear anymore. No anticipation. Just recognition. A chapter trying to stay open after the ending had already been written. She answered. Fanny Silas said immediately, We need to talk. His voice was different now, less controlled, more strained. We're past talking, she replied quietly. You don't understand what's happening, he said. I understand enough. Silas exhaled sharply. My mother is fighting the federal inquiry. If you continue this testimony, I already did. Silas went silent. For once. Genuinely silent. Then you're destroying everything. Fanny closed her eyes briefly. No, she said softly. I'm revealing it. Silas's voice tightened. You think this ends with you walking away clean? Fanny opened her eyes, and something inside her had finally stabilized completely. I don't need it to end clean, she said quietly. I just need it to end honestly. Silence again. Then Silas said something she didn't expect. I didn't think you had it in you. Fanny frowned slightly. What? To do this, he said. To fight back like this? That landed differently. Not praise, not insult, just realization. Fanny understood what he meant. He had always assumed she would collapse, disappear, forgive. But she hadn't, and that changed everything for him, for them, for the narrative he built around her. I spent years making you comfortable, she said quietly. Silas didn't respond. And I think you confused that with weakness. Another silence. Longer this time. Then Silas said almost softer, Are you happier now? The question surprised her because it wasn't strategic. It sounded human. Fanny looked out at the city lights and answered honestly, I'm not finished becoming who I am yet. Silas swallowed. I loved you, he said finally. This time it didn't sound like control. It sounded like loss. Fanny closed her eyes for a brief moment. I know, she whispered. Then she ended the call and didn't pick it up again when it rang back. Outside snow fell quietly over Manhattan. Inside, for the first time in years, Fanny wasn't surviving someone else's story anymore. She was finally beginning her own. The courtroom didn't feel like a courtroom at first. It felt like a stage where everyone had already memorized the ending. Fanny sat at the front beside Naomi Bennett, hands folded calmly over a black folder filled with final documents, evidence logs, and settlement confirmations. Across the aisle, Silas Grant sat alone for the first time in years. No Vivian beside him, no carefully curated family presence, no protection from consequence. Just him and the silence that followed him everywhere now. He looked different, not physically, but in the way powerful men look when they realize influence no longer bends the room toward them. It was subtle, but undeniable. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Proceedings began. But Fannie barely heard the legal language anymore. Everything had already happened before today. This was just documentation, verification, finality. Naomi leaned slightly toward her. "Are you okay?" Fannie thought about the question carefully. Not emotionally, not nostalgically, just truthfully. "Yes," she said softly, "I think I am." That surprised even herself, because she remembered the version of her from months ago, the one who would have broken under this pressure, the one who believed love required endurance. Now she understood something else. Love without truth was not love. It was performance. The attorney representing Silas stood. "We propose a private settlement arrangement to avoid further reputational damage for both parties." Reputational damage. Fannie almost smiled. That phrase again, as if her life had always been measured in optics instead of experience. Naomi stood immediately. Reputation was used as a shield to conceal financial misconduct, emotional manipulation, and institutional fraud. Silas shifted slightly in his seat. First, real discomfort. The judge raised a hand. "Continue." Naomi turned toward the courtroom. Mr. Grant was aware of the hospital switch before disclosure. He failed to inform his wife, utilized insider financial restructuring during that period, and engaged in extramarital conduct involving Ms. Vanessa Whitmore. The words were clean, legal, but in the silence that followed they felt violent. Fannie didn't look at Silas. Not anymore. She didn't need to, because looking at him no longer gave her answers, only reminders. Silas finally spoke. "I never intended harm." The courtroom shifted slightly at his voice. Still calm, still composed, even now. Fannie turned her head slowly. That sentence used to work on her. Once. But now it sounded like something rehearsed. Naomi didn't even let it breathe. Intent does not erase impact. Silence again. Then the judge asked a simple question. "Mrs. Grant, do you wish to proceed with full disclosure ruling?" The room waited. Silas looked at her then. Not like a husband, not like an equal, like someone watching a door that might close permanently. Fannie felt it. The weight of the moment. Everything she had endured leading to this single choice. Silence, control, fear, expectation, and something else now. Clarity. She stood, slowly. The entire courtroom shifted attention toward her. Fannie looked at Silas directly for the first time in days. Not with anger, not with pain, just understanding. And maybe that was more final than anything else. "I used to think forgiveness meant staying," she said softly. Silas's jaw tightened slightly. "But I've learned something else," she continued. "I don't owe permanence to people who treated my trust like it was optional." The courtroom stayed silent. Even the reporters in the back stopped typing for a moment. Fannie turned slightly toward the judge. "Yes," she said, clearly, "proceed." Silas exhaled sharply, not loudly, but enough, because that was the moment control finally left him completely. The judge nodded, then spoke. "Judgment will reflect full financial disclosure, equitable separation, and pending federal cooperation review." It sounded procedural, but everyone understood what it meant. Silas Grant was no longer protected by silence. Outside the courthouse, winter light hit the steps harshly. Fannie walked out alone first. Naomi followed a few steps behind. Reporters immediately surged forward.
Mrs. Grant, is it true? Did you knowingly expose the Grant family? Do you regret?
Fannie stopped briefly at the top of the steps. For a second, she thought about all the versions of herself that had existed just to survive other people's expectations. The polite one, the forgiving one, the quiet one, the manageable one. Then she looked at the cameras and answered calmly, "No, one word, enough." She walked down the steps without looking back. Behind her, chaos continued, but she didn't carry it anymore. Hours later, Savannah met her outside a small cafe far from Manhattan's noise. No headlines here, no flashing cameras, just two women standing in the quiet aftermath of someone else's decisions. Savannah hugged her first, longer than expected. Neither spoke for a moment. Then Savannah pulled back slightly. "It's over?" she asked. Fannie nodded. "Yes." Savannah let out a breath she had clearly been holding for months. "Does it feel like closure?" Fannie considered that, then shook her head gently.
"No,"
she admitted. "It feels like truth finally stopped being punished." Savannah smiled faintly. "That sounds better anyway." They sat together near the window. Outside snow drifted slowly again, but it no longer felt like isolation, just time moving forward. Fannie stirred her coffee slowly. "I'm starting something new," she said after a moment. Savannah looked up. What kind of new Fannie thought about that? Then answered honestly, "Something that helps women who were never given the truth about their own lives." Savannah nodded slowly. "That sounds like you." Fannie smiled faintly. "No," she corrected softly. "That sounds like who I'm becoming." Later that night, Fannie returned to her apartment for the last time as Mrs. Grant. The space felt different now. Not empty, but finished. She walked through each room slowly, the marble kitchen, the glass living room, the bedroom that once held versions of herself she no longer recognized. Finally, she stopped in front of the mirror. No jewelry, no ring, no performance, just her. For a long time she studied her reflection, not searching for approval, not searching for identity, just acknowledgement. Then she whispered quietly, "I'm still here, not broken, not erased, just finally real." She turned off the lights and left. Months later, headlines no longer carried her name beside scandal. Instead, a small foundation appeared in Boston, the Fannie and Savannah Initiative for Medical Truth and Family Restoration. It didn't make headlines the same way. It didn't need to. Because some stories aren't about destruction, they're about what grows after silence ends. And somewhere far from Manhattan, glass towers and Grant family legacy Fannie Grant finally stopped surviving her life and started living it. In the end, Fannie's story was never really about a hospital mistake, a wealthy family, or even a marriage built on hidden truths. It was about something far more universal, the quiet way people lose themselves while trying to be loved, accepted, or simply kept. For years, Fannie believed that endurance was a form of love. She thought staying calm meant being strong. She thought forgiving without truth meant being kind. But what she eventually learned was that silence is not peace. It is often just fear wearing a softer face. And fear, when left unchallenged, becomes a cage that looks like comfort from the inside. Her awakening didn't happen in one dramatic moment. It came slowly, painfully through betrayal, humiliation, and the uncomfortable realization that the people she trusted most were benefiting from her confusion. But within that pain, something powerful began to grow: clarity. And clarity, once it arrives, does not ask for permission. It simply changes everything. Fannie didn't become stronger because life was gentle with her. She became stronger because she finally stopped negotiating her worth with people who had already decided to undervalue it. She learned that love without honesty is manipulation, that loyalty without respect is self-erasure, and that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is not stay and endure but leave and rebuild. What makes her journey deeply human is not just the betrayal she suffered, but the way she reclaimed herself afterward. She didn't seek revenge and destruction. She chose truth. She chose accountability, and in doing so, she chose herself. That is the kind of ending that doesn't just close a story, it redefines it. If there is one lesson in Fannie's journey, it is this: you are not difficult for wanting honesty. You are not selfish for demanding respect. And you are never too much for refusing to shrink in order to make someone else comfortable. Real love does not require your silence. Real love does not fear your truth. And real love will never ask you to disappear in order to be worthy of it. So, if this story made you feel something pain, reflection, anger, or even hope, share your thoughts in the comments. What part of Fannie's journey resonated with you the most? And if you believe in stories that explore truth healing and emotional awakening, like this one, don't forget to like and subscribe for more emotional storytelling journeys.